Disagree. And Damian, I was going to ask you, do you think the internet can be a creative space again? Or do you think when we got rid of the LSD and the ecstasy in the mid-90s, the creativity that was being put into the internet also got...
possibly comment on the latter question. But, you know, Anders, you seem to be getting dangerously close to saying that we have to choose between regulation and innovation.
No, I think we need a regulation that manages to leave things open-ended, and that's tricky.
It's very tricky.
It's very, very tricky. And which is why this next stage, where we're deciding what is the competition framework, and what this online harms framework is very, very dangerous. You know, you've got a kind of a gang of Conservative MPs making a pact with free expression campaigners to try and shoot this bill down because they think it's killing freedom of expression. You know, and just, you know, I would observe that there's plenty of regulation in China. There's also a huge amount of innovation. So I don't think it's a direct choice. And for online harms and the legislation here, there's a lot of work to be done. I think what the government has done is create a piece of legislation where there are too many dangers of censorship in there. So the Secretary of State can meddle in lots of ways with Ofcom. Ofcom is our independent regulator that has to be completely independent from government, by the way, and we need to watch that it is and stop governments meddling with it. They've done both the current government and the former government have been far too involved in Ofcom. Ofcom is now going to be responsible for working directly with the platforms to create codes of practice and define things like what is harmful, what is to be considered harmful content, and also all sorts of different categorizations of what is journalistic content and therefore exempt, and what is democratically useful content. So that is quite close to this question of the Chinese view of protecting social harmony through regulation. So we've got to look at this very, very carefully, and we've got to ensure that no government, let alone this government, is able to use this system of regulation as a way of controlling public opinion. So there's a really subtle balance to be struck between protecting against harms and capture by politicians and special interests.
I mean, isn't a good test of that whether or not the internet within any regulatory framework is still capable of giving voice to dissent? So could the Arab Spring have happened without the internet? Yes, but did it happen quicker? Was the means to communication, was the means for activists to share information about where to go, what to say, what could be said, what might not be said? Was that easier because of the internet? Also, yes. But people could still have demonstrated. Now, I think that if we allow a framework where dissent is not tolerated, where dissent is crushed, that's really problematic for democracy itself. And you're absolutely right, Anders, about this sort of urge of governments to want to protect the harmony. But I mean, I actually think politicians should be brave enough to want to welcome dissent. The thing that we sometimes get caught up in is, when does dissent become abuse? When does it become harm? I find it really problematic, and I say it as a politician. I find it really problematic when politicians decide that they are the ones to decide what is harmful. Whether it's in a democracy or a dictatorship, I find that really, really problematic. But the very nature of independent regulators is that we, the politicians, set the things up. So we still have that inherent tension. But the more power we give to independent regulators to be able to come up with well-reasoned opinions over what is harmful and how we manage that, the better, I think. And politicians have got to be unafraid to welcome the chaos and the lack of protection for the status quo that will inevitably bring. I think that's really important. I mean, I actually use the internet to do democracy. In the last year, we did our democracy on Zoom. I hated it, by the way, but we did do it. I've also used the internet to run my campaigning sessions, things that we just used to do by knocking on a door and saying, hello, my name is Thangam Debbonaire, I want to talk to you about the Labour Party. I can now do on Zoom. I can do it via an online tool that the Labour Party has that allows me to connect with voters, allows me to capture information of a certain degree. I can't capture everything, but I can capture certain things. And I don't get to decide, I shouldn't get to decide when to limit that for other political parties or other activists or other campaigners. It should be a means of democratising campaigns.
You run your campaigns on Facebook?
I personally don't, because I'm really bad at it. I don't really understand social media. I'm really bad at it. But I know other people who possibly do, but I've not done that.
But just super quickly, like one of the stupid mistakes we've made, and it's technically difficult, is that we have these spaces online, we just make almost no attempt to replicate the rules we have for other campaigning. So political campaigning, right, if you get a leaflet through your door, it's got to, by law, tell you who it's published by and the name and address of the agent. Doesn't apply to online political advertising. So it's just...
It's in the elections bill, though.
It is now, yeah.
But now...
But it's a catch-up thing, isn't it?
And of course, there's also then almost no enforcement, because whilst, you know, some of these platforms have enabled political advertising for you to trace who it's going to, it's quite easy to navigate. It's not all the platforms. There's efforts going on this, right? Like this is not a new point, but it is this sort of madness where we think, oh, online it's so special and freedom of speech, instead of thinking, we've talked about this for a really long time and come up with a regulatory settlement about what politicians should do, or, I don't know, the idea of like what advertising kids should be able to see. And so we just don't even bother with it when it comes to the internet.
I mean, this is why I think we should have that rebuttable principle. If it's illegal offline or it needs to be regulated offline, we should have some sort of baseline, which is we start from here for the online world and then work out whether or not we depart from it and how we do it.
Let's engage in a little bit of future gazing, starting with you, Anders Sandberg, because really the question needs to be, what is it you guys actually want? What do you want to see? And in 30 seconds, if we all can, please keep it to 30 seconds. Anders, what would your ideal internet look like?
A global brain. But in fact, a brain actually it consists of a lot of little modules that are not always playing along with each other. Quite a lot of them compete with each other. But you want to make sure that you actually help the good side, which is coordinating people on a massive scale and spreading information widely, can work well. But that requires internal filtering and damping systems that need to be adaptive. And this is very abstract. Unfortunately, and that is part of why it's so darn hard to regulate.
And Polly, you've got two wonderful children running around the festival at the moment. What is three wonderful children? There's one missing.
One of them's a bit weird. You know?
One of them's a bit weird. I mean, what sort of internet do you want them, internet environment, I guess, do you want them to grow up in?
Well, so, I mean, at Demos we talk about the Good Web project, which we're running. And for me, like a lot of it is really just trying to translate all the complex, detailed understanding we have about what makes communities work and actually build that into essentially system design around platforms and communities. We know so much about what makes people kind to one another, how people operate well together. And we see communities online that are fantastic, with open source community, for example, or GitHub, which I do not understand, but I like Wikipedia. Like there are glorious bits of cooperation and mutual benefit on the internet. And actually we need, instead of just always thinking about like, let's chop off the bottom 10%, is actually how do you make the second quartile and the third quartile as good as the top.
Well, Damian, I'm going to give you your opportunities to do your best John Perry in Barlow.
I'm not going there. John Perry Barlow was mad. The ideal internet, we can learn a lot from history here. You know, in broadcasting, at least, we had a plurality of different kind of ownership and accountability models. So we had broadcasters that had lots of licensing requirements and had to really look after people and do what's right for the public interest and meet very high standards. And we had other broadcasters that had lower standards. What we didn't have is and I think we should have online, is community ownership, trust ownership, and charity ownership. And we need to have more different kinds of models. But the legislative initiatives are really trying to shape the future internet. So the kind of services you use in 10 years' time may well be quite different because of the choices that we're taking as societies. So it may be that we are not locked into just a few social media platforms which are basically advertising monopolies. It may be that they have been shrunk and that people have been given data portability, for example, enforced under the GDPR so that we can take our data, share it with other platforms and switch more seamlessly between services. It may be that there has been forms of different kinds of forms of investment which enable services to be launched by other players than large corporations. But I think what's really important is that whichever spaces we occupy online, we know what the rules are and we know what to expect. So if we want to go to a tough and dangerous place, we go in with our eyes open and the rules we know are going to be enforced and that they do what they say on the tin. And if we want our kids to use other environments, terms of service are enforced. Harmful content is taken down. If we don't want to be racially abused, we know we will not be racially abused in those places. It takes public decision making to make that internet, and we're trying to develop these policy tools, but it's going to take some time.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below, or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.